I'm your host, Slim bin Mohammed Rafi. Here is my YouTube channel, Zamir Universal. There is still chance that the World War III can be averted. And it isn't just in a spur of a moment that the World War III will start. It often, there is a trigger point which starts it. A small, tiny conflict can just expand and cross all the limits, all the red lines. And you can see one single Austrian chap, how he prevailed upon the whole German nation, how he hypnotized them, how he brainwashed them, and everywhere, in every street you passed, people either had tattoos, all they had nothing but they were throwing rose petals on the person, which the history proved later on that was Adolf Hitler. And Adolf Hitler had an immense hatred for Jews, and he had a reason. Not necessarily I'll agree with him, and I'm sure there will be many like him, historians, who won't agree that this is not the way that you can eliminate any group or any religion or any kind of people, however dirty, however filthy, however scum of this society they are. Now the rat is in the cage. You must have seen the rat trap. Once the rat falls into that trap, he himself, by assassinating 3 leaders, those people, even those moderates who were facilitating the negotiations for peace so that the hostages could turn back, now there is not a single person in the streets of Tel Aviv and Haifa, and now he is advocating that go down into the shelters. He himself, I think, he uses the in a bunker, he uses for his excretas, he uses, along with his cabinet, he lives in a rat hole, along with all those extremists who just want to destroy and kill everybody. And they think, now look at that, those 9 soldiers who sodomized and who raped men and made him bleed and perforated his rectum with sticks. And now he had that approved by his Knesset and by his, and making a law that this is lawful to torture them and rape them. And this is what he does. So there is no Geneva Convention rules applicable to him, those no International Court of Justice rules applicable to him. He's got immunity in United Nations Security Council resolutions. He's got immunity for everything. So just like Hitler, I think you have now the present time in 20th century, 2024, and since October 2023, although this has been happening for the last 75 years, so it's nothing new. And it is repeatedly, what we are seeing is just a repeat of the recurrence of the picture of what is happening in the Gaza. Although many of us who did not see that before, we didn't see the first Nakba there, we don't know what and how they did. Almost it is a repeat of the same story. And they're proud. You must have heard the person, a young fellow, hardly a teenager, he says that I'm looking for the babies because I've just killed a 12-year-old girl, now I'm looking for the babies. So when you have sick minds like that, when they have taught them to hate the other people, and when they think they are something lower than them, they are perhaps worse than primates, and they kill them, and they kill them for joy, for their shooting practice. So the whole generation of those abnormal, call them monkeys, call them pigs, call them dogs, whatever you want to call them, because that will be a slur, that will be not anything that they look like humans. They say that they are the God's chosen man, and everyone knows that they can't be a God's chosen man because they are the most hated people, and they've been thrown out of the countries. 48 countries they have been thrown out. So there has to be something smelly, filthy, dirty in these people, in their behavior, in their thinking, in their actions, that they have been subjected to this throughout. So you can't blame just the present Arabs, or you can't blame the Palestinians, or you can't blame anybody, that it's their own doing. And so you can see it's Netanyahu's own doing, and the likes of him, that they have brought this thing to the verge of this, that any moment, 12 hours from now, because it's Sunday night, 12 o'clock, that any time now the start in the Middle East, where the whole trade routes, everything passes through this place from east to west, will be finished. So the whole world economy, and see now 40 they destroyed aircraft carriers. How cleverly this man has involved a mentally deranged and an abnormal person who can't even speak properly, and they used him, because 99% people running the White House are Jews, with the interest of the Israel. And I know they've been advising him, it's not in your interest to do this, but he's done it, and he's doing it, and he is going to put the whole, for the first time, the Israel in the verge of destruction. And you will see that you will forget the ruins of Gaza, how the Palestine, is going to be back again from the scratch, from 0 point. Once Tel Aviv, once Haifa, when all these big cities, which they have taken 75 years to have their sky rise, and roads and hospitals and universities and technology and firms and all sorts of things, all back ruined. And that is the revenge of nature, not Iran. Don't blame Hezbollah and Iran and Hamas and Houthis. It is you stubbornness of a person, you tolerate it, and the whole world, I think, is guilty of not having the ceasefire in the first week or 2 weeks or months or since, and everybody kept changing from Qatar to Egypt, from Egypt to there was no intention. Everybody had been hijacked, and I think he just stepped on the feet of everyone, and he didn't want a peace, he didn't want a peace deal, he didn't want the hostages to return. All he wanted was a war, and war. So the warmonger has won. So I can say, hail, as they used to say Hitler, hail Natenyahu. And I also say to Hezbollah, and I say that you are equally guilty, because there was no question of your drone going and combing where their enemy barracks were and where their ammunition factories were. Why could your drone not single out Netanyahu, and just as he had your people killed, just had this menace killed, and so would have saved all the Jews too? And you should have been still the humanity to killing further of the Gaza babies and Gaza women, innocent and elderly and sick and cancer patients and heart patients, and the pregnant women and the babies out of the incubators. All that suffering could be saved by just having one single dirty rat out. And I hope, God, Iran will focus now, instead of killing the civilians or flattening the cities, just as they did to Gaza, they will avoid that, and they will have these 4 or 5 people, once they have been eliminated from this world, the world will be at peace.
When we say centering Palestinian history, is centering history as history, which is different than religious history. And again, to those who understand, religious history is not akin to history. Right? There is a distinction in here. Doesn't mean that you don't learn lessons, but in doing so, you often erase Palestinian history. Even if you think about the digging around Jerusalem, right, the oldest wall in relation to Jerusalem, it dates back to the Canaanites. We know again from the religious narrative that when Abraham migrated to Palestine, it was already a vibrant society. Right? So again, very important in understanding in this. Western Christianity has to be held responsible as much as Zionism for adopting and wanting to push for the Zionist colonial project for its own interest. Because, again, in here you're in the South with the evangelical right, the Hagee and the Friends of Israel. They're supporting Israel not because all of a sudden they love the Jewish community, or all of a sudden they discovered that they hate Muslims. They're equal opportunity, they hate both. But they believe, this is again their own theology, speculative theology, that the return of Jesus is situated on the support for the state of Israel, the reconstituting of the children of Israel in Palestine. And when Jesus comes, you ask the question, Philip Hagee, what happens? Well, 2/3 of the Jews will be killed, and 1/3 will convert to Christianity, while the Muslims are seen to be from the realm of Satan. We don't even qualify to an affirmative action inclusion. We don't even have the possibility of conversion. That's their own theology. You don't take my word for it. Go and look at, Christian Zionism and what their belief system in this sense. So they are using speculative theology, evangelical speculative theology, to push for support for Israel for their own purposes. And if the Muslims and Jews kill each other, might as well they're supporting actors in a theater piece that they are actually not actors in it. The role of Muslims and Jews or Southern Hemisphere is for us to bring the tea on the stage, give it to the Western evangelical Western civilization, and exit stage left. Because there is only one true history from their perspective, is the history that is contained in the biblical narrative as it's been interpreted, understood with their speculative theology. Okay? That is an important piece to understand, because you ask, why the evangelicals are so much supportive of Israel? Or also some other mainstream Christian groups that sometimes they still would support it because theologically they find argumentation to it. And increasingly you find some of the black churches using that same logic as well. So it's very important to understand that this is part of the discourse that we're dealing with. And it was present in colonial discourse as well. Many of you possibly understood manifest destiny, right? The white man burden, that we want to civilize the world and Christianize the world. And there was a debate, throughout on this notion. That debate still have an effect in relations to Palestine. So that's very, very important in this sense. So these are the 6 features that we need to understand when we are discussing Palestine. Right? Otherwise, you really are entering into a conversation and you're getting lost in the minutiae or the details all that is there. Now let me shift a little bit to speak about the most recent development. So this should be the framework behind, in the back of your minds. Palestinians today in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, as well as 48, are feeling the impacts of the Oslo Agreement. If you don't know the Oslo Agreement, it's an agreement that was signed in September 13, 1993, by which the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, recognized Israel, while Israel recognized the PLO as the agency or as the group to negotiate with Israel for final solution, or the final status for the Palestinian areas. Through that agreement, it actually led to the decentering of the PLO, which is very, the PLO was not as, I would say, not as smart as they thought they are. Because they thought that Israel recognizing the PLO as the agency to negotiate with Israel will bring PLO into center stage. It actually decentered the PLO, and in its place created the Palestinian Authority. And it became the focus of negotiations. Now I written around what happened for Oslo immediately thereafter. I said at the time that Israel, as a result of the first uprising, was accustomed to having its own style of colonization. It wanted its own form. It wanted to control every neighborhood. It wanted to know how much beans there is in each falafel. It wanted to monitor the amount of sugar in each of the kinafas all over the West Bank. Literally, they wanted 4 reports from each corner in every part of the West Bank. That security structure collapsed as a result of the uprising. So Israel was actually searching for a new model or a way to replace there is 2 sides to every issue. There is a rape and rapist. There's 2 sides. But this 2 sides is one of the easiest escapable discourses that you could get, because it equalizes between the oppressed and oppressor, the colonized and the colonizer, the victim and the victimizer. So this nonsense of the 2 sides in a colonial structure, had it been in the United States, you would actually have to go and interview the slave owners. How do you feel, oh slave owner, that your slaves rebelled against you? It must be traumatizing for you, so we need a therapist for you at one of our universities. Because it's really very difficult that all of a sudden 100 slaves escaped from your control and rebelled against you. I know. We need an action in Congress to prohibit slaves from rebelling, which happened. So this discourse of the 2-sidedness.
You can actually measure how far down the road Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, has travelled in creating the conditions for a regional war in the speeches of Hassan Nasrallah. 10 months ago, the leader of Hezbollah took a full month to react to Hamas's attack on October the 7th. And even then, he was too circumspect for Hamas's comfort. Nasrallah said Hamas's operation was 100% Palestinian in operation and execution, and had no bearing on any decision or move to be taken by any other faction within the resistance axis. Since then, more than 36 senior Hezbollah commanders and some 400 fighters have been killed, largely from 2 units, its southern front and the Radwan unit, Hezbollah's special forces. But this week, Nasrallah's tone changed markedly. Speaking at the funeral of his deputy Fuad Shukr, and after the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, the head of Hamas's political bureau, in a bomb in Tehran, Nasrallah said, "To the Israeli army, laugh a little now, but you'll cry a lot, as you don't know what red lines you've crossed. Israel," he said, "will not know where Iran's attack will come from. We've moved beyond just a support front. This is an open battle on all fronts, a new phase." The new phase he's talking about is a war on 5 fronts, from the Houthis in the south, Hamas in the east, Hezbollah in the north, Iran and Jordan in the east. Nasrallah is not bluffing, and America knows it. Joe Biden has lost control of Netanyahu and has even less control over preventing or mitigating a regional war. But certain things must be clear even to him. If Netanyahu had any intention of signing a ceasefire deal, he would not have killed Hamas's chief negotiator, nor would he have vowed to keep the Israeli forces in Rafah and the Philadelphia corridor. I don't buy the notion that Netanyahu is in the grip of the Messianic right. Long before Itamar Ben-Gvir surfaced as a political force, Netanyahu made the crushing of the Palestinian national cause his life's work. Today he might think he's on the cusp of his ultimate political achievement as Israel's longest serving prime minister by dragging the US into a war with Iran. Attacking Iran is by far the most important calculation in Netanyahu's brain, and it's frightening the life out of his generals. From a strategic point of view, Israel's action in killing Haniyeh is madness. This is not my judgment alone, but that used by former Israeli General Amiran Levin, who said that the security forces should have strongly opposed the move. If the Israeli military will not be able to defeat or disable Hamas in Gaza, Israel will need people in Hamas to negotiate with, and they've just killed one of them. Even without a ceasefire, Haniyeh was worth more to Israel alive than dead. Israel could have plausibly argued to a Western audience that it would not surrender Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant to the International Criminal Court in The Hague, while another of those named in the ICC's application for arrest warrants, Hania, was free to live in Qatar. Pressure would have inevitably been applied on Qatar to surrender him and expel the political bureau of Hamas. Now that he's out of the equation, Israel has lost that defense. All this Israel has achieved in killing Hania. What Netanyahu can be sure he has not done is to weaken Hamas. Quite the contrary. Hania, a modest man who lost 60 members of his family, including sons and grandsons, to Israel in this war, will go down as one of Hamas's greatest martyrs. Israel has killed countless Hamas leaders and commanders, and the movement has only grown in recruits, weaponry, and political influence. Today, all polls show that Hamas would win in the West Bank if free elections were allowed to take place there. The Hamas that has resisted Israel's attack on Gaza for 10 months is many times the size and capability of the Hamas in the days of its founder, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin. The quadriplegic founder of Hamas was killed when an Israeli helicopter gunship fired a missile at him as he was being wheeled from Fajr prayers in Gaza. Hania was his chief of staff. But it is also no coincidence that Netanyahu is so intent on setting fire to the region when he has a real fire raging at home. That came when a fascist mob broke into an Israeli military detention center in an attempt to stop 9 soldiers accused of raping a Palestinian detainee from being arrested. Among the mob were reservist soldiers and 2 parliamentarians, one of them a minister. Police took 3 hours to arrive. Herzi Halevi, the army's chief of general staff, had to break off a defense meeting on Israel's response to the recent attack on the Golan Heights to deal with this crisis. The army and the police force each blamed each other for the breakdown in law and order. For a time, the accused soldiers barricaded themselves into Sde Timan, the detention base, and used pepper spray to defend themselves against arrest, before eventually being taken into custody. Israel portrays itself to the outside world as the one functioning state in a neighborhood of failed ones. You don't have to build a state in Israel, Netanyahu once bragged to US politicians before Congress. We're already built, but that state is showing distinct signs of failing too. Napoleon and Hitler were at the height of their powers and their respective armies had tamed Europe under their jackboots when each dictator thought it was a good idea to attack Russia. So too is Netanyahu endangering everything Israel has achieved by openly creating the conditions for a regional war and thinking that he could win. The Israeli military know the truth, that killing Hania was the last thing they should be doing if they want to see any of their hostages back alive. They know how well armed the axis of resistance now is and how effective their rockets and drones are. They can feel the vulnerability of Israel's population and economy to a war on 5 fronts simultaneously. Netanyahu is making the classic mistake of overreach in the messianic belief that Jews really are God's chosen people, that the Bible ordained all of this, and that Israel can achieve its goal of complete military victory now. It's precisely at this moment that it is at its most vulnerable and that the whole project could collapse. For nothing other than self-preservation, those who understand this in Israel should act before Netanyahu involves them in a war they can't possibly stop, still less win.
यूनिवर्सल टेलीविजन को सब्सक्राइब करना ना भूलें, उसके बाद बेल बटन पे क्लिक करें और अपने कमेंट्स के सेक्शन में अपने कीमती जो ख्यालात का इजहार ज़रूर